just gonna come back with a little bit more in depth on Diddy. Um, there's a lot of things I want to start out with. We're gonna start out with Simone Redwine and what happened with Bale. With that being said, let's get into it.
But usually they run concurrent. Could they seize this plane? No, not for the. Well, possibly, I guess. If, yeah, he had the ladies on the plane. That could be. That could be.
I'm gonna do some Simone Redwine stuff, and then I'm gonna go back through a lot of stuff from ABC News.
Bullet point the facts and stay on track. The judge always allows both sides, but he is giving it 20 years. Ooh, and if R. Kelly is doing time. Why not do his house, chef, and family were getting ready to party? Speaking of the chef, y'all. Speaking of the chef, why didn't we see the chef in this case? I really want to know. I thought she was going to help prove up forced labor. It was, I don't want to say her name because I don't want, I know life is hard enough. I don't want her to get any negative impact. I follow her. I think she's great. But literally I sat in the courtroom and they said, later this week, the witnesses will be so and they named her. So I was shocked that we did not see her. I'll take you a documentary. Oh, don't forget, guys, my documentary airs tonight at 8 p.m. 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm going to be in the Diddy documentary on CBS. It's called. And you can watch it
Damn,
on
it's hot.
streaming on CBS News 24/7, or you can go to. All right, it says Agnifilo had to go hard like that. Yep, it was a perfect defense. What other tactic would not have? Any other tactic would not have worked? That's right. All he had to do was find one person to say, "I'm not." Oh my God! Oh my God! No, you're great. You're great. Come on in. Yeah, I'm around. Yeah, come on in. This is y'all. So, guys. All right, drop your questions below. Let me know what else you like. I have to cover the dismissal of the James case against Tony Bessie. This is my family. We're doing the holidays for the 4th of July. Hope you guys are doing great. Get your legal Bessie attorney. So hit that subscribe, hit that like. Send me a super chat. I really appreciate it. That's one thing. Bye, y'all. Check that Astro Glide on your way out. Because I can't wait to see what happens with the sentencing. I do not think it's going to be the slap on the wrist that he's expecting. I don't think it's going to be the 21 months.
Let me find
That is
ABC
minus 10
News
months he's already done. So let's see.
since she's getting ready to go off. Yeah, let me find ABC News. Okay, ABC News. Uh, Damn it, I'm gonna have to type in ABC News. Let me see if I can find it down here. Okay. Damn it. Come on, ABC News. Okay, here we go. ABC News.
We're coming on the air right now because the federal judge in the Sean Diddy Combs trial has just denied bail for Combs hours after a split verdict in the racketeering and sex trafficking case against him on the third day of deliberation. The jury finding Combs not guilty on 3 of 5 counts, including him with the most serious charges of racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. Combs guilty on 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Each count carries a maximum of up to 10 years behind bars. The verdict considered a huge win for Combs, who is facing the possibility of life in prison. He's been behind bars since his arrest in September. Let's get right to ABC's chief investigative correspondent Aaron Petersky. And Aaron, we know that the defense was hoping that Combs would be able to the courtroom and go back to his family today. And earlier he even said to his family there that I'm coming home. But it turns out that that is not the case. What are you learning from what happened in this hearing later today?
Sean Combs entered court just a moment ago with looking upbeat. He greeted his family who crammed into the gallery, all in one bench, his mother, sons, twin daughters. And I think he was anticipating that he would be released following the mixed verdict, especially the acquittal on all of the violent crimes. But the judge immediately sat down at the bench, started reading his decision, saying bail is denied. He would not be released prior to sentencing.
Bail
The
denied.
judge said his incarceration is required based on what he was convicted of. Transportation for the purposes of prostitution. The judge said the defense did not make any successful arguments to say that that expectation should be overridden.
All right, Eric, first, Steve, thank you. Stand by for us a moment. You're taking a look at some of these live images from our WABC New York chopper camera here. You can see the crowd gathering outside the courthouse. A lot of people were hoping, people were waiting there outside the courtroom to be able to get a glimpse of Sean Diddy Combs as he was released. But again, that news coming down that he will not be released on bail for now. Let's bring in ABC News legal contributor Bernarda Villalona. And Bernarda, we know that this case was not technically about domestic violence. At least those were not the charges against Combs. But of course, there was that now infamous video from the hotel surveillance that showed him physically assaulting Cassie Ventura. Is it possible that any of that evidence came down to what the judge was considering in terms of his release back to the public on bail?
100%, absolutely. You have to think that this judge is in a unique position that he heard all of the testimony, all of the evidence that was provided through this 7-week trial. He also knows of evidence that wasn't submitted before this jury. So he took into account what he actually heard. He took into account that it's no longer that Sean Combs is accused of transportation to engage in prostitution, but now that he has been convicted by a jury of his peers. He took into account that his ability to flee and not return for sentencing, as well as that he's a danger to the community and also to victims. Remember that Cassie Ventura's attorney, Doug Wigdor, submitted a letter to this court requesting that Sean Combs remains in custody because he is a danger to society. So taking all of that into account, in addition to what his potential sentence will be, does give us a cue into what we will actually sentence him to. While it's a mandatory of 10 years on each of these counts, there is a sentencing crime guideline, and the prosecution is claiming that it's about 51 months to 63 months, while the defense is saying 21 months to 27 months, and Sean Combs has only been in custody for 10 months.
Bernarda, thank you. We are just getting this information from the U.S. District Judge here, citing Combs' domestic violence as part of that justification for his continued detention. He called it a propensity for violence. This is also a quote here from the judge saying it is impossible for the defendant to demonstrate that he poses no danger to the community. Again, that as part of this decision not to grant a bail, to deny bail to Sean Diddy Combs. I want to go to our ABC News legal contributor, Brian Buckmeyer. Brian, you've been watching this case very closely. You've been inside the courtroom at times. So now that bail has been denied, Brian, what are the next steps?
So the next steps will be sentencing. And between today and whenever the sentencing date is, and we're waiting to hear what that is, Sean Combs was visited by someone from the probation department. And they'll interview him, speak with Sean Combs, family members, anyone else that they may be directed to, and they'll create what's called a PSI, or pre-sentencing investigation. But that information will be given to both the attorneys as well as the judge, and will help guide them in terms of the sentencing. Now, Bernarda had pointed out the sentencing guidelines that both parties have before, the defense saying that the sentence should be anywhere from 21 to 27 months, the government saying anywhere from 51 to 63 months, but the PSI.
Wait a minute. He's already been in jail for a year. So hell, he probably gonna get time served and be out by Christmas.
Provide what they think the sentencing guidelines will be, and the other side will try to argue that sentencing that there will be a aggravating circumstances, the government will impose those to the higher or mitigating circumstances to go on a national finding sentence, and of course the potential of what's called physical impact statements. People will testify or give testimony about the sentencing of Sean Combs.
Wire, thank you. I want to go back to Aaron Kursky. Aaron, we know that that sentencing hearing scheduled for the fall. Sean Diddy Combs has already been in custody for 9 months now, and he's also facing dozens of civil lawsuits. What more does he have ahead of him before that hearing? You know, I think it's on October 3rd.
October 3rd at 10 a.m. Sean Combs is going to be sentenced for his conviction on 2 counts.
Remember that date, everyone. October 3rd, 10 a.m. October 3rd, 10 a.m., ladies and gentlemen. Remember that date. October 3rd, 10 a.m. Diddy sentencing.
Counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. Each of those counts carries a maximum penalty of up to 10 years. And so prosecutors pointed out in their letter to the judge his total exposure is 20 years in prison. And the judge today said that Combs' propensity for violence was starkly depicted on that 2016 hotel security camera footage that may well factor into the judge's sentencing decisions. In the meantime, Sean Combs will continue to be incarcerated at MDC in Brooklyn, the federal jail in Brooklyn, where he's been since his arrest. This is at least the third, possibly even the fourth time that bail has been denied, and he will have to fight those civil lawsuits, at least at the outset, from behind bars.
With Aaron Kursky, thank you, and the entire team. Again, the judge denying Sean Combs bail following that split verdict earlier today with the jury acquitted him of the most serious charges of racketeering and conspiracy and sex trafficking. But the jury did find him guilty on those 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. We're going to return in just a moment here to regular programming. Our coverage does continue on ABC News Live at abcnews.com. Also, programming note, ABC News special report, Verdict, the Diddy trial airs tonight at 10 Eastern right here. And then I'll be back with our entire team for a full wrap-up on World News tonight.
Major delays and cancellations already impacting record holiday travel. Plus, the verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. What the jury decided. World News Tonight with David Mueller, the #1 newscast in America.
Right now on ABC News Live, a stunning end to the sex trafficking. His girlfriend testified under the pseudonym Jane. Combs was found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, the most serious charge, and those 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. As the jury left in front of his chest and mouth, "Thank you." Combs turned in his seat to his family and said, "I'm coming home, baby. I'm coming home." And he also kneeled on the ground and appeared to pray briefly after the jury was out of the room. ABC News' Rena Roy is live outside the courthouse there in Lower Manhattan for us. And Rena, what are we expecting from this bail hearing?
Well, Alex, the hearing has been scheduled for 5 o'clock. It is now 5:01 on the dot. We are hearing it's going to get started. They have arrived in the courtroom at this hour, and the family also just arrived to court a couple of moments ago. There's just a massive crowd here waiting to see what happens. As we know, Combs has been held by federal authorities since September last year when he was arrested, but we could see him potentially walk out of those golden doors here tonight if the judge rules in his favor. All day, the defense and the prosecution, they put together their cases for and against his release. Prosecutors say that he is a flight risk. They say that he is a danger and that he should be held until his sentencing. But the defense is saying it's inappropriate to hold him. They say that he needs and wants to go home to his family. And they brought up several reasons for that, including the fact that his mother, Janet Combs, who we've seen in court here almost every day of this trial, she is 85 years old. She lives near him in Florida. She wants him to be her caretaker, apparently. He also has children, they say, including a 3-year-old that he needs to take care of. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. Again, it's going to get started any moment now, Alex.
Well, and Rita, we're looking behind you, there's that black Sprinter van. We've seen the family of Diddy get out of a similar Sprinter van. I don't know if that's the same vehicle, but look, I mean, if he is released today, how would that work?
So there are a couple different options that we could see play out if he is released. And again, that's a big if. We have to see how the judge ruled, how he weighs the different arguments here. Like I mentioned, we could see him walk right out of those golden doors here at the federal courthouse in Manhattan, where we have at this point dozens and dozens of reporters and onlookers waiting to see what happens. Or he could be sent back to NBC Brooklyn. That's where he's been held behind bars. We could see him sent back there to fill out some paperwork and go through some of the proceedings there before he's actually released until his sentencing, Alex.
Well, Rena, you've been outside that courthouse all day. I'm curious, what has the mood been like, especially since his verdict was rendered?
Well, we've really seen a mix of people out here, a lot of characters who are celebrating or lamenting this decision, and you can hear people are honking as they come by. I think that's actually the family Sprinter van that you mentioned that's pulling out. The family just got here. So there's been a lot of commotion, you can probably tell. It's a busy New York City streets, and there are people just coming by to see what's going on, but there are also people who have been here since the beginning. Some of them have been chanting, "Let Puff go," ahead of this hearing. Again, we are standing by and waiting to see how this all unfolds.
All right, Rena, thank you for that. And for more on this verdict, I want to bring in ABC News legal contributor and criminal defense attorney Bernardo Villalona, along with ABC News contributor and senior entertainment reporter for ESPN's Ann Kelly Carter. And Bernardo, I want to start with you. Walk us through the process of a bail hearing.
Yeah, so in terms of what the judge has to decide, the judge has to see whether the defense, by clear and convincing evidence, can prove to this judge that Sean Combs is not a flight risk and that he doesn't pose a danger to any particular person or to the community. Of course, what the prosecution is arguing that there has been a change in circumstance in the sense that it's no longer alleged that he committed transportation to engage in prostitution, but instead that now a jury of his peers has convicted him of that. So that is a change in circumstance. But you also have that competing narrative from the defense that says, look, you've held him in custody pending trial based on the highest charge of racketeering, of RICO conspiracy, and sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, which carry a mandatory minimum of 15 years or up to life. Being that there's a change in circumstance and that a jury of his peers has found him not guilty of those highest charges, that he should be released. Especially when you take into account that there is no mandatory minimum of a sentence of having to deal with the transportation to engage in prostitution. There's also competing narrative in terms of what is the criminal guidelines, the guideline sentence as to what Sean Combs is facing. The defense is saying that the guidelines is 21 to 27 months. We know that Sean Combs has only been in custody since September, so I believe it's only 10 months that he's been in custody. The prosecution is saying that the guidelines is recommending 51 to 63 months incarceration. Of course, all the time that he served, he'll get credit for that. But now you have something else that has been brought into the mix, in the sense that Doug Wigdorf, the attorney for Cassie Ventura, submitted a letter to this judge and saying that if you release Sean Combs, he is going to be a threat to the safety of Cassie Ventura and that he should remain in custody pending sentence. We can get some insight as to where the judge is leaning in terms of a sentence if he chooses to keep Sean Combs in custody, because in his mind he may be saying like, look, you're going to do more than 10 months, so let's keep you in custody because that's where I'm leaning. He's not going to say that on the record, but that is something to glean.
Well, and Kelly, you can't talk about hip-hop without mentioning Diddy, right? And so I'm curious, after this verdict, how is the hip-hop community reacting to this?
Yeah, I've said it before and I'll say it again. The silence has been incredibly loud since Cassie first released that really explosive civil suit in 2023. And I feel like what we probably saw primarily happening is that people were really taking a wait-and-see attitude. They wanted to see what happened with this case, but I think because of the testimony that we've heard and because of that 2016 footage from the Intercontinental Hotel incident, it's going to be really difficult for people who have very similar platforms, who have amplified platforms like Sean Combs, to speak in support of him, which is probably why we've heard
silence for the most part. We have heard from a few people, Diddy said, who has been one of the only people who has been talking throughout the entirety of this case, making a comment from Rosie O'Donnell, we've heard from Kesha, but it's been really silent, I think, in the aftermath of this. We've only kind of seen what the public has said. The court of public opinion, it's really mixed right now.
Well, and Bernarda, as his defense team petitions for his release on bond, we've heard the mentioning of his mother, his 85-year-old mother, who wants him to be her caretaker. We've heard the mention of a 3-year-old child. How does that play in the judge's calculations here?
So interestingly enough, those factors right there are going to be taken into account when it comes to sentencing, but not specifically giving much weight when it comes to detention or waiting sentencing. So yes, the judge will listen to what the defense has to say, but it's not going to be heavily determined on being the caretaker for his mother as well as for that 3-year-old child, because in the end, the judge has to take into account his risk of flight, but also protecting the public. If he is a danger to the public safety or to any other victim, he has to take into account the public good when making this determination as to whether he should be released pending sentence. Again, he's been convicted now, so that sentence that he's going to face ultimately carries much more weight than releasing him pending sentence.
Well, and Kelly, listen, now that potential life sentence is essentially taken off the table, there will be a day, presumably, where Diddy will be free and out and about in the public as well. And so I'm curious, given his career and also given this trial, what does this mean for his legacy? Is there room for him to reemerge in the industry?
So much remains to be seen. I mean, we have seen him rehabilitate himself and remix, to kind of use a word that is synonymous with the work that he's done himself over the years. I don't know that would necessarily apply here. I personally don't see him necessarily returning to the industry that he left.
This year has done damage.
Returning to it in the way that he had before. Remember, he was kind of this unofficial king of like the Met Gala, just the biggest and best and boldest kind of events across all industries. I don't see him returning to that life again in the aftermath of this trial and of these two guilty verdicts.
Well, and the other thing that strikes me, I'm curious because, as they're considering his sentencing here, they've said that he has no criminal record, but this isn't Diddy's first run-in with the law, right? I mean, there was that 1999 alleged incident with Steve Stout, another one alleged incident in 2015 at UCLA involving a kettlebell. Everyone remembers, and he wasn't charged in this. There was certainly the high-profile incident that night, him and J. Lo were at a nightclub, and there was a shooting. But what's different about where we are right now as a society, and also what's different specifically about this case?
Well, I mean, I think that we've learned so much. We've put language to things that we probably didn't have language to back in 1999 when it comes to talking about, sexual assault of women. And so I think that has happened. I think we're far more educated about that now. But I think when this case in particular, this is the first time we've gotten these really intimate details, lots and lots of details about his personal life that we would have never guessed, were happening. And I think that is probably going to live in people's minds for a number of years, and ultimately will play a role in how we view Sean Combs, his legacy, and also his ability to work past whatever the incarceration might look like for these charges.
We were just told by our team that Sean Combs has walked into the courthouse there in Manhattan, greeted supporters, and was smiling. But Bernarda, as we wait for these proceedings to get underway, this verdict doesn't mean that he is out of the legal woods just yet, right? I mean, he's still on the hook for civil suits.
Yeah, so while he's out of the woods criminal-wise, he still has those civil lawsuits. However, it's important to know, when we're talking about civil lawsuits, you're talking about money. So he's out of the woods in the sense of that his liberty is no longer at stake. Probably his financial status is at stake, but not his liberty. Also important to remember that when we're talking about those civil lawsuits, while he may have escaped criminal liability, the
given your expertise, I mean, it seemed like as a defendant, he was really prepped to be found guilty on something, right? Because, you know, hearing the three most severe charges, those not guilty verdicts coming down, you see his reaction. You see him thanking the jury. You see him with that message to his family, "I'm coming home, baby," and then you know, appearing to bow and pray as the jury is out of there. And so I'm curious, you know, from a defense stance, how was he prepped? How was he likely prepped going into this second day of a verdict?
So this defense team, and remember, we're dealing with more than one attorney. You're dealing with about 6 attorneys that have been on his side and have been on his side, especially Mark Agnifilo and Teddy Garagos have been on his side since day one. And they've been in constant contact, seeing him, talking to him since the first day and preparing him for this day to face this verdict and giving him ammunition to be like, keep your head up, that we're going to fight with you. We are with you. We're going to do our best. If something were to happen and you were to be found guilty, we prepare this record for appeal, so we'll take it up to a higher court to appeal the conviction. So they prepared him either way it was going to turn out and kept his hopes high from the very beginning.
Well, and Kelly, you know, I'm curious because you have great context here, especially whenever it comes to music and entertainment and in the world of hip hop. You know, how would you equate this? I mean, is this a similar fall from grace as a Russell Simmons? Where does this chart?
I would venture to say this is far bigger, you know, for a number of reasons. But I think to start, you know, you have to acknowledge that Sean Combs truly is a cultural icon, you know, 30 years in the making. He has been a presence in not only hip-hop, but he expanded hip-hop, not just for himself, but for the entirety of the business. He helped us, you know, turn this into a multi-billion-dollar business. He helped to commercialize hip-hop, and he also took hip-hop outside of the community into spaces that the genre never imagined it to go to, from politics, which was very huge. The Voter Guide campaign was very significant, and he was leading the charge for that. You have the world of spirits. Forbes 500, you know, list was something that I don't think anyone in hip-hop ever aspired to do before, you know, Sean Combs really kind of laid it out that something like that was possible. So this is absolutely significant because he really has been a representation, not only for hip-hop, but also for Black excellence and for his story to kind of be where it is right now, I think is colossal, and it's something that we now have to have part of the conversation when we talk about all the things that he's done.
Yeah, it is actually pretty remarkable because when you talk about, you know, the spans of his career from music and then kind of transitioning into fashion, and then, you know, I think in later years, most folks have kind of come to know him through his promotion of Ciroc. We certainly have seen other rappers and entertainers who have gotten into the spirit industry and just boomed since then, and he was kind of like the originator there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he, you know, the thing about Sean is that he is an incredible marketer, and I think he really showed other people, both contemporaries and people coming up behind him, how to really take advantage and how to market, you know, the product of themselves, because he was a master, you know, at doing that, is a master at doing that. And I think he really showed a lot of people behind him and also people who were standing alongside him how to really do that and how to function in this world of, you know, a high industry.
Sure, and we just got word that the judge has taken the bench, so we're expecting these proceedings to get underway momentarily. But Bernarda, if I may, you know, just breaking down the context of just how big of a trial this is. You know, when you have a household name like Diddy, and the process by which, you know, you've been fielding a jury in a place like Manhattan where everyone knows him, and, you know, this was a huge undertaking.
Oh, absolutely. This was a huge undertaking by the prosecution to actually go after Sean Diddy Combs. I was in the courtroom for pretty much every day of this trial, and you always felt the weight of who Sean Combs was in that courtroom, whether he spoke or didn't speak. People would take that into consideration no matter what anyone actually said. But in terms of sitting with a jury, look how many jurors they had to go through. I mean, it was hundreds of jurors that they had to go through to be able to select a jury of 12 plus 6
have some breaking news right now. The judge has denied bail for Sean Combs. That's what I'm hearing from our team. The judge has denied bail, so he will remain in custody between now and sentencing. More to come on this, but the hearing and news that we were waiting for this afternoon, whether or not Sean Diddy Combs would receive bail, his bail has been denied.
Okay, that's the main thing I want one of y'all for.
And just getting that, so I'm curious your initial reactions. Did it surprise you?
I am not surprised that this judge denied Sean Combs release pending sentencing. You have to think that this judge is in a different position than when he first heard the bail application when Sean Combs was...
Okay, now that y'all know that the bail's been denied, let's go to this here from this morning.
This is an ABC News special report.
And good morning, everyone. I'm Kira Phillips. We're coming on the air because the jury has now reached a full verdict in the racketeering and sex trafficking trial of music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. Jurors had the court scrambling yesterday, you may remember, when they sent a note to the judge saying they had reached a partial verdict on 4 of the 5 counts, but they were stuck on the remaining racketeering conspiracy charge. The judge telling them to keep an open mind. Well, deliberation resumed this morning for a third day. The Combs trial has been going on for nearly 2 months. As you know, graphic testimony, disturbing sexually explicit images, and during yesterday's deliberations, the jury asked for a transcript of ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura's testimony about the 2016 hotel attack that you're seeing here on your screen that was captured on surveillance video in that hotel. That video showing Combs kicking and dragging Cassie in a hallway. Cassie testified she was trying to escape one of those so-called freak-offs when Combs beat her and dragged her back into the room. The jury made up of 8 men and 4 women. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Let's get right to our chief investigative correspondent, Aaron Tursky, is outside the courthouse there in Lower Manhattan. Aaron, I understand now that Sean Combs has entered the courtroom.
Sean Combs is now seated at the defense table here with his attorneys. Judge Arun Subramanian has just taken the bench, instructing everyone in the courtroom to maintain decorum when the verdict is reached. It comes after about 14 hours.
Let me speed this up. Just a little bit.
But I think with the RICO, there's an added issue as well, some automatic forfeiture, because when you are convicted of a
there was a real debate that the jury heard over the course of the last few months about consent and coercion and the complications of deciding when an 11-year relationship between Combs and Cassie Ventura may have become a criminal one, and the jury decided it was not criminal sex trafficking when Sean Combs committed what his attorneys freely admitted was domestic abuse, as you saw in that video. He has been found not guilty now on racketeering conspiracy, not guilty on sex trafficking of Cassie Ventura. He has been found guilty on count 3, transportation for the purposes of prostitution. He has also been found guilty on count 5, transportation for the purposes of prostitution. These charges carry a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison. So we do have a split verdict. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking to Sandra Ventura, but he has been found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. We're waiting for one more count, the sex trafficking of Jane, and just now the jury has decided that Sean Combs is not guilty of sex trafficking, his former girlfriend who testified under the pseudonym Jane. So the jury has now believed that the relationships that Sean Combs had with his former girlfriends Cassie Ventura and a woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane were not criminal, did not involve sex trafficking. All Sean Combs has been convicted of here is transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And Kira, those did seem to be the most evident crimes that Sean Combs committed. We heard testimony from the male escorts. The jury heard about the cash that they were paid, and as prosecutors told them, they were not in those hotel rooms for scintillating conversation. Sean Combs guilty of transportation for the purposes of prostitution, not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking. Kira?
All right, let's put this in perspective now that we know where Sean Combs has been found guilty and non-guilty. Let's put into perspective, Brian, on time people served. What are we looking at now with regard to years? Of course, and we should point out there will be an appeal. He's got plenty of money to do that, but let's take it from where it stands right now.
Kira, I'm still trying to wrap my mind around this. I'm not even sure if I would say it'll be revealed because for Sean Combs and the defense team, this is a massive win. 3 of the counts that have life sentence possibility are gone. When it comes to transportation to engage in prostitution, the minimum is nothing. There's a theoretical possibility that he walks out on probation. Now, do I think that's going to happen? No. But the max is 10 years. Even if you were to take both sentences, and he's not going to get 10 years, they're going to look at his criminal history, mitigating circumstances, aggravating circumstances, and I would assume that he gets somewhere in the middle ground, maybe like 3 to 5 years, 3 to 6 years, possible through that sentencing range for each count. Sean Combs going to trial where he was facing life and being able to walk out with something under 10 years, well under 10 years possibly, that's a victory. Will he appeal? Sure, that's his right to do so, but I don't see an appeal here. I think if you take this as a win, you serve a 2 years. You'd be happy to get life. I'm somewhat shocked as to the trafficking for Cassie. I thought that might have been a stronger case for the government. I didn't think that they had the RICO, and I definitely didn't think they had the chain trafficking, but this is, I think there are only so many words that I keep saying. I think this is a positive result for Sean Combs and his team.
I'm being told now Combs is hugging his lawyer at this very moment. Clearly he's seeing it as you are seeing it as well. We should point out, Brian, let's look at bigger picture here. He is a music producer. He created a brand around himself. He was a big part of bringing hip-hop into the mainstream. There is an entire entertainment business side to this. How do you see, from your experience, this win, as you are saying, for Sean Combs, how will it impact his business empire?
I think, for lack of a better term, there's always going to be a blemish on Sean Combs' career. I think people are going to look at this in 2 different ways. In one way, they're going to think that Sean Combs probably had a history of getting into trouble with the law and somehow getting out from under the law. We're going to look at past events for both civil and criminal complaints and say, you know what, he's always had good lawyers or whatever it may be, and he's gotten away with bad charges, especially looking at that use of confidential video. But I think the other view of this is going to be is that he was tried by a jury of his peers. All of the information, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between, was shown to these 12 people, and they did not see the criminal enterprise. They did not see the forced fraud and coercion. And I think the trafficking to engage in prostitution, I think that's going to be a lighter blemish on his career in terms of the totality of what we saw. As to like, okay, so you paid for people to go across the line to have consensual sex, and I think consensual sex will be a big part of the conversation based on how the verdict came out. And so, do I think he takes a big knock in terms of this case? Yes, but we've seen Sean Combs rebrand and come back from a lot of things, and that is a possibility here.
But let's put it into the context, Eric Kontursky, of the Me Too movement. I don't think anybody can forget the video, the surveillance video that we saw over and over again in that hotel hallway of Sean Combs fairly naked in a towel, kicking and dragging Cassie Ventura.
Ma'am, the domestic violence is not on trial.
Unforgettable piece of video, and it was one of the most visual pieces of evidence that the jury saw during the course of the nearly 2-month trial. Kira?
Again, the domestic violence is not on trial, which it does speak to its violent nature. But again, the domestic violence is not on trial. Let's continue.
And the defense really admitted what's depicted on it as domestic violence, but they said all along he's not charged with domestic violence. The defense insisted, even though the defense did not put on much of a case, called no witnesses, that what was depicted was not sex trafficking, and the jury seems to have agreed. And Sean is clearly taking this outcome of a split verdict, guilty on only the transportation for the purposes of prostitution charges, as a win. The jury has been excused. As the 8 men and 4 women stood to leave their seats, Sean Combs made praying hands in their direction and bowed his head slightly as if to say thank you. When the outcome was read aloud in court, Combs put his hands in the air and looked to the ceiling, clearly taking this as a win that he was acquitted on the most serious charges he faced here.
And now I understand, Eric, his attorneys are calling for him to actually be released today. Could that happen?
Well, it could happen because he has already served about a year's time, a little shy of a year, and there will be a sentencing date. What the defense is likely arguing is that he is now no longer has anything to do with a violent crime. Transportation for the purposes of prostitution carries a maximum sentence of 10 years, a minimum of nothing. So it will be up to the judge to decide. But where he is no longer accused of a violent crime, the defense may have a good case to get him released until he is formally sentenced. If that happens, it's possible he could walk right out the golden doors here. Certainly a number of his supporters and others are waiting. Members of his family were certainly elated. They were not allowed to show any emotion, but they are remaining in the courtroom to see what happens, what the judge ultimately decides here.
Brian, your thoughts on the fact that he could be released today?
So, at the beginning of this case, when Sean Combs was charged with sex trafficking, that is a charge that has the assumption that someone should be held pending prosecution. That assumption is gone now because he's been found not guilty of those 2 charges. And to piggyback on what Aaron is saying, severity of his punishment has greatly decreased. He's no longer looking at life. He's looking at a max of 10 years on each count. Some of that time he's already served while waiting for this case. Mark Niccolo, the defense attorney who's leading this case, has said that his private plane is in Maui. He has no access to it. So he's hinting at the idea of a number of things that a judge will consider when thinking about bail. Is this person a flightless? How serious of a sentence are they looking at? And flightless goes into 2 portions. The actual ability to fly and not come back to the jurisdiction, but also the likelihood of doing that. A person who's facing life, more likely to be a flightless. A person who's just beaten 3 of the 5 top counts in a trial like this and is only facing 10 years, far less of a flightless. And so while I think it's somewhat of a Hail Mary for him to be released today, this is the strongest possible outcome that he could have had to make this argument, and I think the defense has a leg to stand on in making this argument that Sean Combs should be released pending the sentence.
Let me ask you, Brian, because you and I were talking for days about the videos, just how explicit they were, how Sean Combs treated these women, listening to Cassie Ventura break down on the stand, listening to other women, former girlfriends, talk about the way he treated women. I brought this question to Aaron, but I want to ask you as well, as someone who's an attorney, someone who has been in the courtroom for cases that involve domestic violence, knowing what we know about what happened and how he treated these women, and now looking at this outcome, how he's been acquitted of most serious charges. Your overall thoughts moving forward about what this says about the Me Too movement, the power of a music mogul when he has money, when he has fame. Your thoughts?
So, my thoughts, I think, I try to go beyond being an attorney, and I'll try to sidestep that between this talk because I'm there as an adult. I think there can be no mixing of words as to what Sean Combs means when it comes to the stop. Either. There's no question as to what we saw in terms of the strength of the women who took the stand and testified about the abuse that happened to them. There's no question about the photos we saw of Cassie in terms of the bruising of her body, bruising of her face, and the violence in that Intercontinental Hotel. Full stop. There's no justification of that, there's no explanation of that, and I think in terms of the Me Too movement, there should be strength in the fact that those women will believe in terms of what they said. Putting my attorney hat back on for a moment, I think the difficulty of this and what may be perceived, and I hope it's a perception and not a reality, of the Me Too movement taking a step back based on this verdict, I think it comes from the overreaching of the government in this case, of trying to fit the allegations of this case into a RICO conspiracy, made it that much less palatable for the jury to take what they were saying to be true. And I think that might have also affected, in some way, shape, or form, the trafficking as well. I'll be honest, I'm somewhat shocked that they did not find Sean Cohen guilty of trafficking Cassie because of the violence there. But I think that they made a mistake of not understanding the difference between a brutal domestic violence relationship in which Sean Cohen participated in and was in many regards an aggressor of, if not the absolute aggressor of, and trafficking. And I think the overreach and misapplication of what 12 people in the Southern District of New York, or what society would believe to be trafficking in RICO, that misstep and misperception is what led the SDNY here. The SDNY has phenomenal prosecutors, has a phenomenal office, and their record speaks for itself. But I think in this case, they overestimated the strength of their case, and this is what happens when the jury speaks.
Aaron, outside court, tell us about who you're seeing. How big of a crowd is it? The sense of the support, if indeed he does walk out of those doors, as you said. The type of support he will receive.
Well, out here now, Kara, there are, of course, a number of reporters, a number of bloggers who have been following the trial, curious onlookers, tourists, those in the park across the street doing their morning workout. But everyone is certainly curious whether Sean Combs is going to walk out those golden doors released on bail. His defense attorney, Mark Agnifilo, told the judge a moment ago Combs would be willing to put up $1 million bail to assure that he shows up before his sentencing. Federal prosecutors just opposed his release on bail, saying that he has committed a litany of crimes and there's no reason to believe he would do anything different if he is released now. Federal prosecutors believe Sean Combs still represents a danger and a risk of flight from justice. They point to the physical violence, even though he was not found guilty of sex trafficking nor charged with any physical violence. But they say he has shown a predilection to committing physical violence, as the defense readily admitted. So the prosecutors are opposing his release on bail. The judge is going to take a moment to decide.
Brian, your thoughts? Is Sean Combs a risk?
So the question is the risk, of course, right? Would I want Sean Combs to be around any girlfriends or women right now? No. Because I think the allegations in the past show that he is a toxic individual who can be very violent towards women. But if you're asking as to whether or not he's a risk to not come back to court to be sentenced, maybe it's my bias as a defense attorney, and looking at his verdict now, I do not believe he's a risk to not come back to court. I think if anything, he's elated, he is happy, he's excited to come back to court to formulate the best argument for sentencing. And yes, he might spend some years in prison, but the amount of time that he would spend is far less than if he fled and never came back. And he has children here, he has enterprises here, he has at least 60 civil lawsuits that he has to fight. He has, in my mind, and maybe I'm making too strong an application as a defense attorney, he has far more reasons to stay here and fight now after this verdict than to flee and never come back. And so, do I think he's going to get released? I'm not. That's a high bar to overcome. I don't think the judge will allow that. But I think there is a very valid and strong argument that he is not a flight risk. And I think there's a possibility, although
still report.
He will give a decision today, Kira, but the government and defense attorneys are asking for a period of hours so they can write letters, make their arguments on both sides. So it could be quite a while before the judge decides whether Sean Combs deserves to be released on bail. The government is making the case that he still faces up to 20 years in prison after his conviction on the two transportation for the purposes of prostitution charges, but the jury has cleared him of the most serious charges of sex trafficking and racketeering conspiracy that could have sent him to prison for life.
Brian, how do you think, what was it that defense lawyers did? What was it that they said? What was it that they had that you think helped deliver a victory for the client?
I think the case against Sean Combs the first time, at least in me covering the Harvey Weinstein trial, where I was sitting in court, the R. Kelly trial, where I was sitting in court, and many other cases that I think we were associated with the Me Too movement, where the defendants are willing to say, my client is the defense towards those actions. But what he did and what you saw was wrong, but making the very strong distinction and walking the line of saying, what is wrong and what he's being accused of are two different things. When we've seen the people in the past of saying, well, they're all lying, you can't trust these women, you can't believe them. I think that's not a way to handle these cases. And I think what the defense did well is in talking to the human aspect of these are very messy relationships. And Sean Combs is an abuser. And Mark Nicholas said it himself. Sean Combs was accused of domestic violence and would not be tried because he was plead guilty. Do I think that's a bit of showmanship? Yes. Do I think that would actually be true? Maybe not. But I think arguing it nonetheless in front of the jury and admitting to some of the bad facts and trying to parse through it all, I think he gave us credibility to get to this point.
Bringing up Bernardo Villalona, who's been also with us as an attorney, as a contributor here at ABC News. You and I have been talking every day for months now about this case, Bernardo. I asked Brian this question as an attorney and who has been involved with domestic violence cases. I want to ask you as well your thoughts on what this means for the victims.
For the victims, I think this is a slap in the face for the victims. I think this is going to deter victims from coming forward and telling their story and being the voice for the voiceless in the sense of representing other victims that are not willing to come forward. I know that for a fact, I'm sure that the prosecution right now is very upset with because they definitely put a lot of time into this prosecution, into this investigation, and they also did a lot of comforting or trying to give strength to these women to gain and to passing, to come forward, to show their face, to share their story. And this is not just like any other regular domestic violence case or just any type of abuse case. You're feeling that they were stepping forward to speak against a music mogul, a person who had key to New York City, one of the most powerful people in the industry. So just think of how scared they were to come forward and to tell their story, and scared of what could happen once they came forward. Because I'm sure with social media and people talking to you, that they have received a lot of threats and people commenting about who they are and what they've done and that they are liars. But they and they alone know what happened to them. And we have prosecutors that believed in them and believed their story and became their voice.
Aaron, I understand court has now been adjourned. Combs was escorted out. A massive applause was heard from within the courtroom.
And we're done here. See y'all later.
The judge said court is adjourned for now, Kira.